All right, welcome to Module 5. You are now in the home stretch, almost done with Management 621 and probably ready for a well-deserved break and rest. I hope you've enjoyed the course up to this point in time, and hopefully Module 5 will provide a nice ending, a bow on the top of the package, so to speak. What we're going to cover in Module 5 is the last major concept that I'd like you to be aware of from a foundational perspective for entrepreneurship, which is this concept of exit strategy, which I'm going to describe in a moment. And then the fifth module is also an opportunity to try and integrate some of what we've covered throughout the prior four modules and make some sense of what we've learned, primarily within the context of watching a movie about a startup, and I'm going to describe what you need to do in watching that movie. But the whole end point here is to come to a conclusion, maybe not draw major conclusions, but come to a conclusion, at least have some way of applying what you've learned in the class and tying it all together, if you will. It's not a neat bow, but at least I think it'll be a bow. So let's talk a little bit about exit strategy. So basically, the easiest way to think of an exit strategy, and you're gonna do some readings on this. They're not terribly long readings, and I'm not going to cover everything in the readings. I just want to set the stage to give you some ideas about exit strategy, and really what an exit strategy is for an entrepreneur is, or just an exit strategy in general, is it's a pre-planned way of getting out of a specific situation. Oftentimes we think of an exit strategy as, getting out of a particularly sticky situation or something that's not good. When they teach you driving skills, how to drive a car, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was going through that years ago, they said always leave yourself an out. So always be looking for a way to maneuver out of danger as a driver. And it's the same way with an exit strategy. We're thinking, if we're at a party and we see somebody we don't like and we get engaged in a conversation, maybe our exit strategy is somebody texts us and I have to take this call, or I have to go see somebody. So just a pre-planned way of getting out of a specific situation. In the context of entrepreneurship, we usually view it more from a positive and less from a negative. Hey, I've got to get out. This is more of a positive. And from the perspective of a way of leaving or cashing out of a business that you own. So it's you've started a business, you've grown it. Hopefully you've grown it, it's successful, and you're going to find a way to leave the business of your own volition, or you're going to cash out of the business. It's the conventional thinking is, and really kind of what we teach in a lot of educational programs is that every entrepreneur should have an exit strategy, that you should go into every business with a pre-planned way of harvesting your crop at the right time. You decide what that method of harvesting is, and you decide what the right time is in a pre-planned way. It may not turn out that way, but the reality is you're trying to predict the future to some degree, or plan for what you want to occur down the road. And whether it actually happens or not is another story, but it's the process, I think, that's important. And that's what I think the conventional thinking is people believe it's important that you go into a business thinking that I'm going to have to get out of it at some point, either for positive or negative reasons, and I should at least think about what that might look like. Flip side of the coin, others, the people that argue against, would say that you should never go into a business with the idea that you're going to leave it. You should go in focused on the task at hand, not be distracted, not think about the worst case scenario. Don't do a pre-mortem. Don't think about an exit strategy. Focus only on growing the company and creating value for your customers and creating a sustainable investment and revenue for yourself and your team. That's akin to the what I call the burn the boats, win or die mantra. If I don't know if you're familiar with that, or you've heard that story, but it's a common tale that's told. It goes back to prior times, and the popular story is the commander of an armed force instructs his troops to build the boats. They build boats that carry them across the sea to take on their enemy. When they land, they get out of the boats, and the commander tells them to burn the boats. And they're astonished that all that work they put into the boats to carry them across the sea to this native land, which they're going to try and conquer, and the commander is telling them to burn the boats. And basically he says, the lesson here is you win or die. There is no going back. And so it's the same for folks that kind of believe in the exit strategy that you shouldn't have one, you shouldn't think about it, is that, like, don't focus on anything but winning. Anything less than that is not important, and don't worry about how you're going to exit or sell the business later on. Just focus on being successful, and you can worry about that when the time comes. So burn the boats, win or die. So that's kind of the general gist of how exit strategies are looked at currently. Another thing to think about is that it's often positioned that exit strategies are a choice, that it's something you should do and think about, and that you will have a choice in the matter. But sometimes it's actually driven by outside forces. You may not think you need an exit strategy, but it's going to happen to you, and you're going to have to deal with it, either up front or down the road. And some common examples would be if you're going to take out on outside investors. In other words, if you're going to raise capital for your business and you're going to get it from outside investors, even if that's friends or family, but maybe it's angel investors, or let's say you have a firm that meets that very small percentage of startups or early stage companies that would be attractive for venture capitalists. Those folks, by investing in your company, want to hear you talk about what the exit strategy is for the company, because that's the only way they're going to get their investment money back with the return on investment. They can't sell your stock because it's not a public company. You may not be in a position to buy it back. If they don't have an exit strategy, if there's not an exit strategy, there's no way they're getting their money back. And one of the angel investors I've known for many, many years, in fact, he was one of the original Tech Coast Angels group members when it started way back in the late 90s, mid 90s. And that was a time when angel investors were not very formal. They were still learning the process. And he said, his first investment, he invested in a company, substantive sum, that 15 years later, 20 years later, he still owns a part of that company because the entrepreneur had no exit strategy, doesn't want to sell the business, and there's literally no way for this investor to get his money out. He said it's just sunk there. He'll probably never get it back. So it's almost as if he lost the money, and that's because he wasn't savvy enough at the time to demand that there be an exit strategy in writing, and that there had to be a liquidity event within a certain period of time, or the entrepreneur had to buy back the stock that the investor had taken. So it could be driven by these outside forces. Another thing to think about is competition and industry changes. You may not want to sell a business. You may not have gone in thinking about selling a business or getting rid of the business in some meaningful way, but competition and industry changes may force that on you, or timing may just be right. If the competitive environment's really ratcheting up and you have to really sink a pretty significant investment in the company to keep up, and you're not willing to make that investment, you may be better off selling at that point. So an exit strategy at that point would make sense. I was working with an entrepreneur, probably, goodness gracious, it's probably been 7 or 8, 9 years ago now, that he had a very successful company. His first company failed miserably, dramatically, to the point where he lost his house. He and his wife and his 3 kids had to move into a 1-bedroom apartment. I mean, they failed, and he had to start over from scratch. And he did successfully. He started from scratch, started another company, built it up. It was very successful. He had had a huge house on the hill overlooking the ocean. He was at a point in his life where things were great, and then his industry was getting super competitive. There was consolidation taking place, lots of things happening, and he said, I'm either going to have to put a gigantic investment to keep up with these changes that are taking place, or I'm going to need to probably sell the business to somebody else that's willing to do that. And he had a long talk with his wife, and they decided they didn't want to put their success on the line anymore. They didn't want to lose the house again. They didn't want to start over from scratch in their mid-50s, and they decided to exit and sell the business. So competition and industry changes can drive that. Because he said, "Hey, I never thought about selling this business. It's generating a lot of cash for us, and we're really successful. So why should we sell it at that point?" The other piece of the puzzle is that there may be some health, there may be some family issues, there may be some disability or death issues. You got to think about those things when it comes to your business, and if you're not thinking about them up front, eventually, if you stay in the business long enough, you're going to face them. There's going to be some health issues. You may face some health issues. There may be family issues. There may be disability, and God forbid, you may pass away. I mean, it's going to eventually happen, but you may pass away, and then there's going to have to be an exit strategy, or at the very least, a succession strategy. So thinking about it from that perspective, several years ago, an entrepreneur, a friend of mine, had cancer and had a very successful company, but as he realized at the time, had never really thought about succession or an exit strategy, and now was suddenly faced with pretty long odds of surviving the cancer. And he at that point had to really sober up and say, I never thought this would happen. I never thought about succession plans for my business, and now I need to start thinking about it because I may not survive this. And unfortunately, he didn't survive it. And so exit strategy from health, family issues, disability, death, you have to think about those things. I remember having a very candid conversation with my father a few years back. Both he and my mother had gone through some health problems. They still owned the majority stake of our family company, and they never wanted to sell the business. And I finally had to say, Dad, you may live forever, but the likelihood is it's not going to happen. And what if something happens to you, and now Mom is saddled with running a company which she really has no interest in running it. She's retired. She doesn't want to go back to working. She doesn't know the business other than the financial side of it, so she doesn't have the technical skills and the entrepreneurial skills to run the business. What happens if you pass away? And then she's left there with a business. You're going to force her into having to do something, selling the business, going through a really stressful time after you've just lost somebody that you've been with for, at that point, 55 years, I think. So it had to have a candid conversation about the fact that an exit strategy was going to be happening, whether they liked it or not, and they needed to think about that. Switching gears, you'll find out in the readings, there's a lot of different ways that you can, get out of a business based on, what's happened before or what's feasible for you. Some of the ways, typical ways that people exit the business, they sell it or they merge with another company through a, merger and acquisition. The rarer case is that companies go public. They have an initial public offering, the IPO. In some cases, very successfully, the company is sold to the employees through an employee stock ownership program. That's become very, very popular and allows loyal, committed employees to take an ownership stake in the company and eventually buy out you, the owner, over a period of time. So you don't sell it all at once, but you sell it over a period of time. Another strategy is to use the business as a cash cow. It's really not an exit strategy, except for the fact that you exit from running the company. You hire professional management that runs the company for you, and you still collect a salary and cut of the profits. but it basically throws off cash because it's so successful, and you're able to have succession and management, and they can successfully run the company and provide that cash cow for you until you decide to sell it. The other piece of the puzzle could just be a liquidation. You could sell the business, or instead of selling the business, you just shut it down. That's it. Shut down. Close the doors. Sell off whatever assets we have for their value, and we're basically done. So those are the various ways. That's not a comprehensive list, but that's the most popular ways that folks will exit a business. So let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about startup.com. This movie, hard to believe it came out in the late 90s, early 2000s. It is a documentary. It follows over a period of time two young men who started a business during the dot-com boom way back when, the gold rush of the late 1990s. It's a fascinating documentary about what they went through, and it follows Tom and Khalil, and both the good and the bad, and really what you want to do in watching them as they start up this .com business called GovWorks is watch the movie from the perspective of everything you've learned in class thus far. So when you think about ideas and opportunities, when you think about who entrepreneurs are, when you think about teams, when you think about resources, when you think about startup models, when you think about all those different aspects of the entrepreneurial experience that we've covered in this class, try to view the movie from the lens of those things, and with the end goal of trying to uncover what Tom and Khalil did well, or what they did right, but also what they did wrong, or what I say flat out stupefyingly wrong. Because they did some really good things. They were good at certain things. They were on the money. Other areas you'll see they're all over the place. They're off the mark, and you'll see some. Hopefully you'll be able to read between the lines on some things, and there's other areas where you'll see some team dynamics that play out. And one of the kind of the most ironic pieces of the movie is that one of the team members who actually has and I'm not giving anything away, but you'll see it, one of the team members that has actually the least committed to the venture at the end of the day ended up doing the best financially out of the whole situation. So it's kind of interesting to watch this whole dynamic play out with two young men, it caught up in the real heady times that they lived in of when startups were the hottest thing on earth. So again, integration for this module, when we talk about integration, it's about applying the framework of the class and thinking about it from the perspective of what if Tom and Khalil knew what you know? What if they had taken this class? Would they have done anything differently, or would their experience been the same? It's kind of interesting to think about it. So as you watch startup.com, think about it from that perspective. So let's talk about integration. The objective of this course, really at the end of the day, was to have a basic understanding of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, about the process and who the people are and what the dynamics are and what happens in entrepreneurship, and hopefully we've met that objective with this course. From some of the comments I've gotten from people, and I had a real nice conversation with Hai yesterday about the class. It seems like we've hit that mark, but I hope that resonates for you, that you do walk out of it with a basic understanding. It wasn't meant to, as I said at the beginning, it wasn't meant to make you an expert. It wasn't meant to make you bulletproof. It was just meant to give you the entree into this strange and fascinating world that if it's attractive to you, you can move forward and learn more. But I will say this, the class does, at a basic level, give you enough knowledge that if you did jump into the pool, if you jumped into the deep end right now, you have enough knowledge stockpiled if you retained it and you learned all, and all those learning takeaways stick with you. you've got enough knowledge to avoid the rookie mistakes that most people make, and you have a better idea of what lies ahead of you as a nascent entrepreneur. Just avoiding the rookie mistakes is huge alone, because all the people I've met over the years that didn't do so well, they shared a lot of common rookie mistakes, and had they known better, probably would have been more successful or had better odds of success. And from the perspective of, you now completing the course, at least understand the role of those components of the entrepreneurial experience, what it takes to be an entrepreneur, what are ideas, and what's a business opportunity, and what's a startup model, and how do I know which startup models to think about, and what's a business model, and how do I develop a business model, and what are resources? Do I understand what resources are? It's not just money, it's more than that. Do I understand the role of teams in an entrepreneurial venture, and how to put together a team, and all those wonderful things? And then do I understand this concept of an exit strategy? Those are really, really important, and I want to take a look at each one just to kind of revisit some of the things that I think, to give you some perspective of what maybe you've learned in this class. I want to kind of go through each of those areas and just kind of talk a little bit about them from the perspective of what you've learned and what oftentimes people don't know about those things, and that kind of puts it more in context of this rookie mistake stuff, because most of the time these rookie mistakes are made because people just didn't know any better. They just didn't have the knowledge. So let's take a look at opportunities. In this class you learned how to generate ideas and where ideas came from, or where ideas come from. And you basically should have a sense of whether your ideas are any good or any bad from the perspective of how to tell the difference. And we talked about those 5 conditions. Having some criteria to cast your ideas against. You should also know that, whether you should follow your passion, because oftentimes you develop ideas based on passion areas in particular. Most people do. And they think because it's something they're passionate about that it's bulletproof, that it's going to be successful, because I love it. I'm hooked on this. And you should, coming through this class, know that just because you have a passion area, your ideas aren't going to be aren't always going to be that great. And I got a lot of comments from people about how hard the idea generation process was for many of them. And even when it's a passion area, sometimes it's hard to generate ideas. And just because it's a passion area doesn't mean it's going to be a great idea. And just because you're passionate about it doesn't mean you should follow it. So I think you've gone through the process. You know where to look for ideas. We talked about where ideas and opportunities are born. We talked about some places you look, where you can come up with that ideas, how you can come up with them, and you really understand the concept of blue ocean and innovation. What role innovation plays in an entrepreneurial venture, and you understand the concept of a blue ocean, thinking a little bit differently, asking those rice questions, applying those to existing industries, because as a lot of people noted, it was kind of eye-opening that you don't really have to create something entirely significantly new. From an industry perspective, you don't have to be super groundbreaking there. You just have to ask the right questions to expand the market, to expand the blue ocean, or expand the red ocean, into a blue ocean, to expand the boundaries of an existing industry. It's very powerful stuff, and if you've never even heard of it, which most students don't, have never heard of it when they come into my class, it's a real eye-opener. And think about that from the perspective of you've never heard of it, you can't use it. You have no knowledge base. So it can't help you. So from the perspective of opportunity, ideas and opportunities, you guys have learned quite a bit. Startup models. It was really interesting that most people in the discussions, actually I think everybody, really gravitated towards the lean startup model. And the reality is most people that start a business that don't know any better, they follow the traditional model, because that's what's kind of been pounded into us over the decades. Is like everybody kind of knows, and even some people in the class alluded to the fact that when they came in and they learned about the startup model, and in fact I think at least one person has followed the traditional model, maybe a couple people have followed the traditional model in their small companies, where you write a business plan, you develop the product and service, you get the financing, you bootstrap, and you go to market, and hopefully people buy what you've got. And in some cases, They don't, and in fact, in many cases, they don't. And so we've been programmed. The legacy of this, write a business plan is out there, and generations have learned it, and they're not aware of any other alternatives. And now along comes all these other models, lean startup model, the SHIP model. There's all these things we can use. They're at our disposal, and if we know the relative pros and cons, we can decide which one's best for us. And I think my own bias is towards the lean startup. It's it's customer first. It's build, measure, learn. It's we're going to make a series of small bets, commit small amounts of resources before we make our big bet. There's a time and place to make that big bet, but we're going to do it incrementally. And I think you know the options. Most people don't. They know the one option that has been popular in society, and until something like the lean startup model becomes super embedded in society and in popular folklore wisdom, people won't know about it, and they're going to continue to replicate the same old mistakes that we're trying to get away from. You won't make those mistakes if you ever pursue this, because you know the difference. And then you understand the types of factors you need to consider when you're looking at a business concept and the process you've got to go through. So just looking at those startup models and thinking about the business concept profile, you know some of the things you've got to start thinking about. We know we got to talk to customers, but what else do we need to know? We need to understand the market. We need to understand the competitive dynamics. We need to think about those things. From the startup model perspective, you know that stuff. And you understand the business model, and you understand the facets of the business model. So you understand that there may be some pivots, there may be some changes, there may be some tweaks, but you've got a basic grasp of business models that somebody off the street doesn't. Looking at the team dynamic, the reality is, my experience is that most people go it alone because they've bought into the conventional wisdom that entrepreneurs are lone wolves. They're maverick individuals that go out and create businesses, and they go it alone oftentimes when they really need to put together a team. And when they do put together a team, oftentimes they assemble the dynamite team. And I'm not talking about the dynamite as in, wow, it's an amazing team. I'm talking about the dynamite as in it's going boom sometime down the road. It's going to implode. It's going to explode because you got the wrong people. You built the team based on the wrong factors. You put together a team of people that you like. They're your friends, but it's not the right team. It's not the team that's going to help you build a business. You didn't get the right people in terms of skills and all those wonderful things. So most people, having done the readings, having done all that teams are valuable, that actually investors want to see teams of people. And the common wisdom is that a really good team of people could take a so-so business idea and actually make it successful, whereas a team of so-so people can take a great idea that represents a really good opportunity and they can run it into the ground. So you understand that dynamic of teams and what makes a good team. We talked about the factors. You went through that in the readings. How do you construct a team? What makes a good team? You also understand the role of leadership in the team. You're going to see that, in the startup.com, you're going to see the role of leadership on a team, how important that is, and how well that needs to be defined. And that plays into the concept of unequal equals. Holy crap. Slicing the pie correctly in terms of ownership, understanding that, we may all be equal in going down the road of this venture. The reality is we're not all equal on the startup team. And there's going to be a slicing the pie, allocating ownership, all those things, really, really important. You understand that. The folks that have made these mistakes, they didn't have a clue because they had no background, no experience with this. And then you also know that you're not going to duplicate yourself. I've run into a lot of startup teams where they're all the same. They all have the same skill set. They all have the same type A personality. They drive each other nuts. They step on each other's toes. Complementary skill sets, diversity. As I said in the lead up to one of the modules, you can't have 5 Kobe Bryants on your Lakers team. There's not enough basketball to go around for 5 Kobe Bryants. You got to build the right team. And successful teams typically do that. And I also always think back to the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team that won the gold medal, the Miracle on Ice, and how well constructed that team was from the perspective of complementary personalities and skill sets. They had to build the right team to be able to compete against the best teams in the world. And it may not have been the most talented team in the Olympics, but it was the most cohesive and the most dynamic team from the perspective of having lots of unique personalities that came together, worked well together, and had complementary skill sets. A team of scorers, the Kobe Bryants, not always the best team. You know all these things because you've been exposed to them. You may have known some of them coming in from your work experiences, but this is a nice reminder that teams are an important part of the process. In that Timmons model, looking at the opportunity, the team, the resources, this is a critical component. And if you don't get it right, it's a weak link in the chain. Any weak link in the chain is going to hurt you in the long run. Just mention resources. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that have told me I can't start the business because I don't have the money. I've got this great opportunity, but I can't start because I don't have the money. And a lot of times my response has been, well, you don't need all that money. You could start small and scale up. You could go out and prove this concept and then get financing. You could bootstrap this thing. You really could make this happen if you're willing to do it. And in some cases, too, they're waiting for the perfect alignment to happen. They don't want to quit their job until this all comes together. I've told people, work on this in your off hours. I know it's challenging. It's not going to be, nobody said it was going to be easy, but I can't tell you how many really successful entrepreneurs I've met were working full-time and developing the business in their off hours and actually launched it in their off hours and got it going, and once it started hitting its stride, then they quit their job. Most folks wait. They wait for the perfect time. You understand from a resource perspective that you can bootstrap, you can be resource creative. I use that example of my entrepreneurs that had the plastic tubing company that had they waited till they had the money, the opportunity might have passed them by, or they may never have gotten the money and they may never have started the business. They said, you know what, we're making this happen. We're going to find a way to make this happen. So you have been exposed to that concept in this class, so you should have a better understanding of the overall resource component. You should have an understanding of the financial components. We talked about how important gross margin is. I had you do some readings about entrepreneurial finance. I didn't really go into a lot of details on cash flow and cash is king and all that stuff, but the resources, super big component. And the last, maybe in my mind, maybe one of the most important pieces of the resource puzzle that most people don't understand is the cultivation and maintenance of a personal and professional network that you can leverage. Startup companies can leverage their network. This is crucial. And oftentimes people think money first when actually your network can be a huge lever for the business. I'm even thinking back to the time when I started here at Cal State back in 2002. I came up here. I had a lot of great relationships in the community. Both from my time as an entrepreneur and my time in economic development. And, I had a wonderful network of both strong and weak ties. Strong ties, close relationships. Weak ties, knew people but didn't have real strong relationship with them, but I knew them well enough to tap into them or ask them for a favor or expertise or a connection to somebody else. So I had those ties. And when I came up here to Cal State to build the entrepreneurship program, which was a huge task, that was an incredible, in fact, it was the most significant resource I had because we had no money up here. I had to go out and get it. And I had people in the community and my connections that were saying, hey, involve us up there, look us up. In fact, one of them said, get up there, get 6 months under your belt, get comfortable, and then come to us. We've got some money we want to give you to build some programs. But we want you to get acclimated first, and then when you're ready in 6 months, come see us, and we'll start investing in your program. And they did. one of the people that hired me up there said, don't mean to be crass about this, because we're not demeaning your talent or your enthusiasm or your entrepreneurial ability, but quite honestly, a big chunk of why we're hiring you is because of your Rolodex, because of who you know, and we figured that you're savvy enough to use that. So the network's huge part of that resource component. Last but not least, most people really don't understand what it means to be an entrepreneur. They confound the whole small business owner entrepreneur thing. They only know the popular profile, for lack of a better term, of entrepreneurs. And the popular profile is not always right. There's the myths and there's the realities. And I'm so sick of hearing people say entrepreneurs are risk takers. They're dramatic risk takers. One of my former professors in my doctoral program called them unguided missiles. They're crazy risk takers. And they do take risks, but they don't see it that way. I'm in the camp with a lot of people that think entrepreneurs are incredible at mitigating risk. They work to reduce risk, and then when they think it's manageable and doable, they take the risk. They'll take more risks than the non-risk takers. Non-risk takers will look at what they're doing and think, holy crap, those people are crazy. But entrepreneurs are great at mitigating risks, and they'll take the risks, but they really don't see it at that point as a huge risk. They figure they've done enough work that the odds are pretty much in their favor. And it's why, people think they're risk takers, gamblers. I had a colleague that did a study, actually a doctoral student that did a study on risk taking among entrepreneurs. And one of the factors he looked at, he asked over 50 entrepreneurs in interviews he did, he asked them, do you gamble? And every one of them said that they did not gamble. And he was talking about gambling, like going to Las Vegas or a casino, that kind of stuff. And every one of them answered that they didn't gamble. And he said, why is that? And they said, because most of the games, with maybe a few exceptions, there's no way to control the odds. There's no way to control the process to where you have a better chance of winning. And it got down to the point of they were working for ways to mitigate risk. And most people think, hey, it's about taking wild risks. And so what do? They go out and take wild risks. It's really not. So you've gone through the process in this class. You've learned who entrepreneurs are. You've taken those tests. You've looked at your risk-taking propensity, your proactiveness, your innovativeness, your entrepreneurial orientation. You have a little bit better understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur and what entrepreneurs do and what their traits and behaviors and characteristics are. And you know the difference between entrepreneurs and small business owners. And you're not caught up. You know the myths and realities. You're not caught up in this one-size-fits-all common popular misconception, I call it, about who entrepreneurs are. Having that starting point, just being self-aware, having a great self-awareness about what it means to be an entrepreneur is huge. I've met so many people that had no business starting a company, but they just didn't know. They just didn't understand what it meant to be an entrepreneur. The lure was too great because it's popular. It's a hot thing to do. It's a sexy thing to do. The allure was too great, or the need was too pressing. They had to do it because they needed to replace a job, or they were bored in life, or going through a midlife crisis, or didn't like what they were doing, whatever. The allure can be too great and the need too pressing, and people can go into entrepreneurship without really understanding what it all means and what the process is and whether they're an entrepreneur. One of the greatest learning points that I've had students get from going through my courses is the ones that really weren't sure whether they were an entrepreneur found out in the class. And if they learned that I'm not really sure I am, that's great, because now they're not going to rush out and do something foolhardy. They're going to think about it. And I always tell them, we evolve as people, and who you are today isn't necessarily who you are in 5, 10, 15 years. And I was telling Hi this yesterday. I said, I wish I knew now. I wish I was as entrepreneurial 25 years ago as I am now. I wish I had the business knowledge I had 25. I have now that I had 20, or I have had it 25 years ago. That self-awareness I think is really, really important, and you should have at least some of that because you understand who entrepreneurs are now and what the process is that they go through. It's a better personal gauge for you because you understand the entrepreneurial mindset a little bit better and you understand the demands that entrepreneurs face. I think that's really, really critical. We can't make such personal decisions if we don't know who we are. It's just like getting married. If you don't know what you want, if you don't know what the criteria is, how do you know what you're going to get? Same thing with entrepreneurship. How do you know you want entrepreneurship if you don't understand it? And you don't know what it entails. I always tell people, if you want to go into a specific industry, you want to start a business, you've never been an entrepreneur, and you want to go into a particular industry, and you don't have any experience, you ought to go work in that industry for a while and get to see what it's like. I remember, I forget who was telling me this, but they were advising somebody. I actually may have been an article I read where a person was advising somebody who wanted to buy an existing company. It was a bakery business, and he told the guy, he said, "Don't buy the business. Talk to the owner. See if the owner will allow you to work in the business for 6 months, and if at the end of 6 months you like it, you can buy the business." So they worked it out that way. He worked in the business for 6 months, came back 6 months later. He said, "So, what's going to happen? I'm not buying the business." The guy found out that the bakery business is really tough, and it's not for the faint of heart. And you start at 3 in the morning and you work till 11 o'clock at night every day. Not that easy. So having some experience, having a personal gauge to be able to see whether this is for you, that's so, so important. And at least you have a taste of that coming out of this class. So I want to talk about integration from the perspective of what we didn't cover in this class that is pretty significant, and that's why when we do entrepreneurship as a concentration for MBA students or for undergraduate students, that's why we take multiple classes, because we just can't do it all in one class. So you got a good taste, and you got enough that you can make informed decisions, but you are still lacking some things. And I'm going to go through this list really quickly. I mean, we didn't go through the nuts and bolts of entrepreneurial finance. There's a whole approach to entrepreneurial finance and projecting income and expenses and cash flow and all that stuff, and valuation of your company. And there's so many components that we didn't get to because this class isn't designed for that. And in the undergraduate program, we teach a separate class on entrepreneurial finance. It's a resources class, and a big chunk of it is now entrepreneurial finance. We didn't talk about entrepreneurial marketing. We didn't talk about the differences between corporate marketing and entrepreneurial marketing. We didn't talk about distribution channels and how that affects your business model. There's a ton of stuff we didn't cover from a marketing perspective. We didn't talk about how you execute the startup models. In other words, the nuts and bolts of carrying out the lean process. If you're going to use the lean process, then you're going to follow kind of Diana Kander's all-in startup approach, which is tied to the lean process. That implies that you're going to go out and you're going to interview. Diana says, and as most of us that subscribe to this method say, you should go out and try and talk to 100 people, 100 potential customers. But to do that, you got to know how to go out and interview them. You got to know what you're looking for. You got to know how to not ask leading questions. We could spend a whole module on how you actually do the lean startup process. And that's why Eric Ries wrote a whole book. And we only scratched the surface of that piece of the puzzle, so to speak. You launch a business, there's launch strategies, and there's mechanics, and there's all kinds of things that you need to know, from the most basic about legal issues, incorporation, what models to choose there. I mean, there's so many things we didn't cover that you need to know about. We didn't talk about growth, and we didn't talk about managerial approaches. I don't think, forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think I talked to you about the phases that entrepreneurs go through and how you need to evolve with your business, because as your business grows, you have to evolve, and you have to have, if you're growing quickly, you have to understand how to manage that growth, otherwise it will kill the business. You have to understand how you need to evolve as a manager, because in the early stages, and I think I may have briefly mentioned this, you're doing everything, and then eventually you're going to be managing people, and then eventually you're managing managers, and then eventually you're at the 30,000 foot level, and that's all you do. You got to be able to evolve and do that, and your managerial approaches have to change, and for a lot of folks, it ain't easy to do. So we didn't cover all that. I didn't give you any guidance or instruction on how to pitch your concept. That's a critical skill. It's something we teach all of our students that are majoring and focusing on entrepreneurship. I didn't teach you how to deal with external investors and give you the real nuts and bolts of how to go through the external investment process, or how to deal with bankers and SBA loan process. I mean, I touched on a few high-level things, but we didn't delve into that. We didn't talk about negotiation. That's such a key skill. There's just so many concepts we didn't cover that I wish we could have gotten to in this class, but you just can't do it. It's not impossible to do in one class, and it's even more impossible to do in 5 weeks. And then last, and certainly not least, and perhaps maybe even most important, is that we didn't give you I call them the 3 S's. Maybe I actually did, because the module goes so quickly, but we didn't give you the sweat, the stress, and the sleeplessness. And unless there's ways to do that, and what I mean by that is you didn't feel the entrepreneurial process. You learned about the entrepreneurial process. You didn't feel the entrepreneurial process. And a big part of the entrepreneurial process is sweat. It's what they call the sweat down your back, from the stress and the uncertainty of everything. And you didn't experience the sleeplessness. Again, you may have experienced that because the module's fast and you guys are juggling tons of stuff. Big props to you guys for doing that. But you didn't experience it because of the stress and the uncertainty and what's going to happen tomorrow. That's such a huge part of the process. And that's what I talked about previously. I talked about resilience, where you have to be resilient and you have to have a tolerance level. You have to be able to tolerate these kind of things because they are a part of the process. And there's no way, in some ways, there's no way to teach you that. You have to experience it. And there's ways we can do it in classes, but it's almost impossible to do in a 5-week online class. And it's a limitation. But that's the kind of stuff we didn't cover. And I wish I could have you for 10 weeks and we could go through more of this stuff. I wish I could have you for more classes and we could do this stuff. But there's ways to learn this. There are materials and resources out there. I'd be happy to point you, in the direction of those if you are interested. So just let me know. So wrapping up, we're going to talk about your next steps for this module, which is really, it's really simple. Readings on the exit strategy. They're short and sweet. Watch the startup.com movie. I like it. I still use it, even though it's now an older movie. It's still a great movie from the perspective of kind of integrating what you've learned in this class. Do the discussions, obviously, and then you have projects due in Module 5. I sent out an email earlier today that basically outlined, the fact that I've moved the reflective paper to where you can turn it in at the end of Module 5 instead of pretty much at the end of Module 4, and that's fine. The personal entrepreneurial discovery is due kind of mid-Module 5, and then the business concept profile due at the end of Module 5. I extended that deadline. It was originally the 20th. I've extended it to the 22nd, so for both the reflective paper and the business concept profile, you have a couple of extra days to knock those out and get them to me. So once again, let me know if you have any questions, any concerns. I'm here to help. Reach out to me. email, text, phone, whatever you want to do. And I'm probably going to come back and do some kind of a wrap up on the class, parting words that I will send to you probably in an email. But and I know we still have a little bit of ways to go, but I've thus far it's been a great experience. I've really enjoyed working with you guys. I thought to this point everything you've done has been really, really interesting. Discussions have been great. Projects have been pretty good overall. Um, it's you guys have done a really, really nice job. And I will say this from the perspective of I had not worked with this online cohort, and hearing some of the comments that other instructors had made about the cohort, and which sometimes were positive and oftentimes were not complimentary. I have to tell you, I came into this with an open mind, and you guys have been, like perfect. Not perfect, but like really, really good. I mean, everybody's been spot on, and I compare you favorably with any MBA students I've ever had. I think you guys have done a really, really, really good job, really great job, engaging the material and being serious about it. And for that, I give you huge props because, like I said, I've heard the rumors around the hallways of these online students, and you guys, none of those were true. And I'm pleased to say that. And I wish you the best of luck moving forward in the program. I know some of you are almost done or finishing. Some of you have a ways to go. Enjoy the experience. Learn as much as you can, because that's the key. If you can't learn it and remember it, if you don't learn it and remember it, you can't use it in the future. And you want to be able to use this stuff. Even my stuff you want to try and be able to use in the future, whether you use it for your own business or you use it to set yourself apart in your existing corporate structure that you work in. So, all right, I will catch up with you after Module 5. Enjoy.